Hello, in this movie I'm going to talk about how you do burst with piercing shot on the marksman hunter. So first I want to show how this works on a training dummy. I've put vulnerable up on the training dummy, and vulnerable will cause my aim shot and my piercing shot to hit for 100% more, but I also have the patient sniper talent, so the longer that vulnerable is on the target, I get even more bonus from it. It's 10% more for each second that it's up on the target. So you see the vulnerables up here, it's wearing down. The longer I hold off on this, the more bonus I get from vulnerable on my piercing shots and aim shots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cast wind burst, and then I'm going to cast piercing shot right after that. But piercing shot travels faster than wind burst, so even though I cast piercing shot after wind burst, it actually hits the target first, and it's going to get the bonus damage from the vulnerable that you see that's already on the training dummy. Okay, so I stopped it right here. You see I've cast my wind burst and I've cast my piercing shot. My piercing shot is going to hit the target dummy first, and it's going to get the bonus from vulnerable, right, almost ticking off right here. The 745,000, that's my piercing shot, and then my wind burst hits right after it for 477,000. If you come over to the combat log over here, you can verify this. You see piercing shot hits before the wind burst. So my piercing shot got that vulnerable bonus from the vulnerable that was just wearing out, and then my wind burst hits and refreshes the vulnerable. Now another nice thing about this is that piercing shot hits harder, you know, when you have more focus. I had full focus when I started that. I also used true shot, and true shot gives me back 100% focus. So you see my focus went to 0, and then bam, it's all the way back full. Now I can just do aim shots using the vulnerable from the wind burst. And that is a lot of potential damage in a short period of time. Here we have the extreme on one end where I'm going to be hitting very, very hard because I have the berserker buff and it's a monk carrying the flag, so he has stacks from the flag. Now I have initiation. I have an extra 30% chance to crit when the person's above 80% health. They're above 80% health. My piercing shot's going to hit first, so my piercing shot has a pretty high chance to crit. Also, from a trait, I think it's a trait, when you have true shot up, you get 50% damage bonus when you crit. So these two things work together with piercing shot hitting very hard. I have vulnerable up on the target, but I'm having to pull the trigger here a bit earlier than I'd like to because they're so far away from me. I was barely able to stop them by getting a binding shot stun on them. So I would have liked to have waited a little bit longer, but I had to pull the combo here a little bit sooner than I'd like. Otherwise, this piercing shot could have hit a bit harder. You know, I did my wind burst into piercing shot. I've stopped it here when the piercing shot hits. You see the piercing shot's hit, the wind burst hasn't hit yet. The piercing shot has crit for about 1.6 million damage. And again, you see here the vulnerable is about halfway through. I would have liked to have waited longer, but when you're in PvP, you have to take your window of opportunity when it's there. Otherwise, it might not come up again. My wind burst is going to hit. Now the wind burst did not crit there. The wind burst hit for 534k. If it crit, probably would have two-shot him right there. Okay, and here's that clip in full speed. Mages are really vulnerable to this due to their low health and their cloth armor. So first of all, I have a whole folder full of clips where bursting shot just totally fails. And if you look at this, if you look closely, you see the lines coming out from my character there. That's bursting shot. This is point blank right in his face. And let's see what happens. Yeah. Oh, he just ignored that bursting shot? Are you fucking shitting me? The reason why the bursting shot failed is because he's desynced from me because of latency. So I throw down a binding shot on him. You can see here he is stunned. He's affected by the binding shot. But watch how far he moves. Even though he's affected by the binding shot, this is a sign of desyncing. When you stun someone, it does resync their position. Okay, so he moved from here to here. It's because of that desyncing. That's why my bursting shot failed. It's up to Blizzard to write code to compensate for latency and desyncing with players, and right now the cone on bursting shot is too narrow. It needs to be widened and extended, similar to the range on Dragon's Breath, right? Dragon's Breath has a huge cone. It's very wide and it's long, and the reason why it's done that way is to compensate for latency. But whoever made bursting shot just decided that everybody is playing in Korea, you know, with the best latency in the world or something. Okay, but that is a story for another movie perhaps, so back to the topic at hand, which is bursting. And you can see I've set things up. I have the mage stun. Here you see the vulnerable, and I've started my wind burst cast. My piercing shot hits first, and my piercing shot hit the mage for about an 870k crit. Windburst hit right after the piercing shot, and this is the thing, you have to consider these two abilities hitting together. They hit at almost the same exact time. So when you talk about the damage that's hitting, you need to add them. The Windburst does not crit. It hits for about 300k. That's over 1,000,000 damage right there. Bam. I know some of you are purists and you don't like gunpowder charges. If you want to remove that damage, go ahead, because this is Battlegrounds. You don't have access to gunpowder charges in Arena or rated Battlegrounds. But my gunpowder charge hits him for 506k crit, and you see he's almost dead. If the Windburst had crit, he would have died fully inside the stun. Here's a clip where I neither have Berserker buff nor use a grenade. I interrupted this monk and they dodge rolled away, and I was able to binding shot their dodge roll. You see I've set it up. I have vulnerability very close to rolling off here. I've started into my Windburst, and I think this is about as well as you can time this. So my piercing shot is going to land just right before this vulnerability wears off. Piercing shot lands, 443k. That's a non-crit. That's not bad for a hit. And look at the vulnerability. I mean, there's just a sliver left. Then my Windburst is going to hit. And the Windburst hit there for 272k. So I got unlucky there. I didn't get any crits. It still hurts him. I mean, you're talking about 700k damage all coming in at once. And he takes off running. Okay, so I give chase and I run him down and scatter shot him. And I know some people said, well, you never use aim shot. Well, maybe I haven't shown clips where I use aim shot, but I use aim shot. There's a time and place for aim shot, of course. I have vulnerability on him. I have scatter shot. I'm going to finish him off with aim shot. Okay, 2 aim shots. A lot of hunters really don't like the vulnerability mechanic, and it's fully understandable, especially in PvP, because things happen. You get CC'd, someone uses defensive, maybe you have bad luck with RNG, and you just can't get that vulnerable lined up, where you can do something like what I'm doing with the piercing shot hitting, in the vulnerable. So here's an example of a clip where it doesn't work out. I have it set up, I have vulnerable on him, and what I want to do is I want to come in and scatter shot him and then do my Windburst piercing shot combo, but he feigned death. That little bit of time threw me off enough. You see, I get him with scatter as he comes out of the feigned death, and I go in to do the Windburst piercing shot combo, but the vulnerability I had on him wore off. This is why I don't macro Windburst with piercing shot. They're on separate buttons, because sometimes you want to hit them in different ways. If he has vulnerable, then I'll do Windburst piercing shot very quickly, like bam bam. The buttons are right next to each other, so I can do that. But here, since I know that the vulnerability is worn off, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to do Windburst, and then I'm going to pause, and then I'm going to do piercing shot. That way the piercing shot hits after the Windburst, because remember, Windburst puts vulnerability on. If the piercing shot hits here before the Windburst, it's a total waste of piercing shot. So you see, I altered my timing there just a little bit, and if you look over here on the left, my Windburst hit before the piercing shot. You need to remain flexible.
Choosing for you.
So I'm going to go ahead and call it a movie for now, but what I plan to do is have some fuller fights later on where I talk about how I kite, when and when not to use aim shot, from my opinion anyway. And this fight will be there. That's against a rank 1 Frost DK, and the outcome is a bit disappointing, but maybe not for the reason you might think.